Is it not an arthritis or pain? No, also, you miss it down. I know, we're not much. Like you can do for him. Oh, yeah, that's what yeah. And it's still, it's man, and then I was what about these three? He's the one who's doing the dance. She hasn't been there. Not going to get nothing. Yeah. No, I know. She's not with him now. What project finding on home or what? Okay. Yeah, alright. Yeah, I'm not sure. Are you alright there, Pete?
Yeah.
Can we just do it for you? What are you trying to do,
I'm
my
just
lovely?
saying, if I can find the plug that I can have, if it's long enough, I can put it in there, we can put this here.
This one?
No, this on the floor.
Oh, okay, okay. Don't worry about it. There's all kind of lines. If you want the lights on there.
Well, I thought it might be nice, so I don't want to
Hang on,
be,
Jack.
I don't want to be denying you.
There you go, there's some pretty ones on there. Now.
Oh, right, that's great.
Right, sorry, Jack.
Okay, thanks, all right.
Okay. Alright. Alright then, my darling, I'll see you at home.
Well, good morning. It's all go here, and it is the 4th day of December. We're trying to get a little bit of a Christmassy spirit in there. Yes, we have. and we have standing by. We have Philip, and I'm not sure whether Richard will join us this morning. We'll ask Philip in just a minute. But first of all, I think we better do our traditional opening, haven't we? Yes, we had. Just so you know who we are. And it's here somewhere. It is here somewhere. So get ready, steady, go. From Lewis in the Black Horse Pub. And there, as if by magic, is Philip.
Yes, good morning.
Philip. How are you today?
Keith. I'm not bad. Got a bit of a tummy ache, ironically because of bad cooking yesterday by myself. Now, when I spoke twice to Richard on Saturday, he gave me no indication that he couldn't do today. So I really don't know.
Well, if he pops up, it will take nothing more than a click of a button to have him join us. So why don't we, perhaps what we could do is we could just pass the time of day for 5 minutes, because that's a nice way to ease into a Monday morning. And perhaps you can tell me, what did you cook that gave you a tummy ache?
Well, it was a perfectly good shoulder of pork with crackling that my wife bought from our local butchers, which is like Pete the Butcher. We have Joyce's Butchers in Central Arundel, and long may they continue. But I don't know. I had an odd day yesterday. I really wasn't myself, and I got the timings wrong. The one thing you don't want is undercooked pork.
No, that's for sure. Actually, I noticed that your insults were less yesterday than they normally are. So I thought there was something amiss.
Well, if you meet on Friday, I wasn't too bad on Friday, but I find this time of year quite difficult. I know that sounds bonkers because Christmas is meant to be all lights and candles and enjoyment, but no disrespect to my adopting family, because I'm an adopted child. We had some pretty miserable Christmases, and that included my mum insisting on I and Jackie and our kids, when they were very, very young, driving up to Cheshire in appalling weather, staying in hotels which were very expensive, and on at least 2 occasions the car broke down.
Oh dear.
So I just find it a bit of a difficult time.
Yes.
You know,
I'm
sure.
interested. I'm interested that you're adopted. My daughter is adopted. She is her late mother's natural child, but I adopted her at the age of 4.
Ah, good for you.
Yeah, and I couldn't have done it better if it had been my seed. She's been a wonderful daughter, and we're very close. The only way that you can tell, actually, that she's adopted is she calls me Keith.
Yes. Well, I never went that far with the only parents I ever knew, Bill and Daphne. And it's from them I get my surname Meredith. Dad was literally a born and bred Mancunian. Brought up.
As if that hasn't passed to the son.
No. Born and bred in what we now call the inner city, Cheetham Hill. Whereas Mum was very much younger, an only child, but of natural parents, my maternal grandparents. My grandfather was called Granville, which is where I get my middle name from, because I am PG Meredith. And Dorothy was my maternal grandmother, and I was very close to them. But like I say, Mum was an only child and married my dad when she was really very young. And I'm afraid the age gap was pretty disastrous as he got older and infirm. He had a very bad car accident. He was knocked out on the main A6, Stockport Road, on his way to work, and he never really got over that. And then he developed a hiatus hernia, which needed quite a serious operation, which was pretty stressful for everybody. And in the end, he fell and broke his hip, which elderly people do, because he was very wobbly. And they operated on him quite successfully, but they didn't mobilize him enough, and he died of static pneumonia.
Oh dear.
Which was awful to watch, because you basically drown. The lungs just keep producing secretions, as they call them, and you get to the point where you can't drain them anymore, and the antibiotics in those days just didn't touch it. So sadly, that was the end of Bill.
Yeah. For
almost intangible reasons, this time of year, I'm in a pretty poor mood, really.
Oh dear.
But there we are.
I'm sorry to hear that. It is all our lives are a book, I guess. Very interesting. As you talk to people, so that you find things in common. I actually have a hiatus hernia, but it's treatable. I pop a pill each day, and if I forget, boy, do I know it. And the other thing that is perhaps a bit different to me and your dad is I fall a lot because I got Parkinson's, as you know.
Yes.
And what I've done is I've learned to fall. I rarely hurt myself when I fall. But it's a great feeling of helplessness as you hurtle through the air and you reach out and there's nothing to grab, and just the ground coming up at you.
It must be awful. I'm delighted you've learned or taught yourself, as you say, to fall. But there are just some situations, and this is worrying for me, but about my wife, because she has MS. Thankfully, the least progressive form of it thus far, and she does extremely well with it. But she is pretty wobbly down one side. It's affected her left side. And particularly when things get icy or snowy or whatever, or the terrain is not flat or even, it is a worry, because she's also got a level of osteoporosis. So she's very vulnerable to breaking a hip, for example. So we have to be careful.
Yes, indeed.
But I'm glad you've learned to fall. Is the medication you take for your hernia, is it called lansoprazole?
Yes.
Yes, because I take that for different reasons.
Ah.
I don't have a hernia yet, I don't think, but I do have what they call an incompetent gastric valve.
Yes, lovely. Thank you.
Which may be the same thing. So
yeah.
I get a lot of acid reflux, and the lansoprazole helps that hugely.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't help myself because I drink far too much red wine.
Yes. I share that with you.
But no, that's a great medication, lansoprazole. It works wonders with a number of people.
Yes, it is. It's to me, it's a miracle drug.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It is quite extraordinary. And if I miss a dose, boy, do I know it. And then I go for the Gaviscon, which has a side effect. I learned this from the pharmacist only the other day, having used Gaviscon for years. Gaviscon is huge in sodium, salt. So there I am on medication for high blood pressure, and I'm chucking Gaviscon down my neck, doing my blood pressure no good whatsoever. So I now take it very, very sparingly. I mean, a glass of milk helps.
Yes, it does.
You're
quite right.
My now retired GP said to me, he said, we actually have no medical idea why milk helps, but it does. But my dad's hernia was so bad that he would choke. Well, the family used to call it getting it stuck. So basically, he couldn't swallow his food. It got stuck in the gullet at the top of the esophagus there. And it was awful because 2 or 3 times, I remember as a child, he was so without oxygen, he went blue. And my mum, thankfully, was a trained nurse and knew how to do her best to loosen it, but very stressful. Yeah. And even to this day, I rush my food. And I'm in absolutely no doubt that I rush my food because I couldn't bear to be at the table with Dad, knowing that that was going to happen. And invariably it did.
Yes, yes.
And my worst one was when he came to stay with me in London, and my then girlfriend, and it happened just with me and her there. And I had a real struggle, sort of, well, saving him, basically. Very stressful, very stressful. All of these things, they leave their mark. I'm
Yes,
afraid.
they do. They do.
They leave their mark.
The only saving grace that I have is, as you're getting to know me, is I am very much a half glass full man.
Yes,
and I actually wake up every morning and I tell my Parkinson's to bugger off and to stop
Yes.
interfering with me. My reflux is I just say no to that 26th glass of red wine.
Well, yes, as I get to know you, and you are a breath of fresh air, you are very glass half full, which is admirable. I find that hard to achieve, I'm afraid. And not just at this time of year. My nickname at work was Eeyore. And at one point, my colleagues bought me, quite unwittingly, not knowing the others had done it. I at one point had 3 copies of the book Eeyore's Little Book of Gloom. And I've still got one somewhere. But, Richard's very upbeat,
Yes.
which I like to think helps him get through what he's going through at the moment. But I do worry just currently why he's not joining us.
Yes, I'll just let me just let me check to make sure that he hasn't come through and sort of say anything, but I don't I don't see that he's come through at all. Or no, I don't see that he's come through to say why. So we must hope that it is perhaps because he's been through so much that he's slept in. Which is helpful.
Well, that'll be fine.
Yeah.
I've just checked my emails. I haven't had a text from him, and he's not sent an email through to my other email address. So,
can I just say back to you, Philip? That is your nature is I am full of admiration for, because you are so meticulous. I mean, when you talk about Napoleon or you talk about the English Civil War, the facts that you have at your fingertips far outweigh mine. I mean, I just see the color. You actually can almost name exactly where somebody was wounded on a battlefield.
You pay me
commendable.
You pay me, as ever, a great compliment. You are very, very nice to me. I mean, a lot of it is to do with research, but I do have a residual knowledge of a lot of these events. And the one subject I would like to do sometime is stuff to do with the First World War.
Yes, indeed.
In which I've always had an extremely deep interest. I mean, it's a sort of serendipity, isn't it? I mean, what spurred me to suggest that you and I chewed the cud about the English Civil War was that article in our local church magazine. Had it not been for that, I wouldn't have had something to suggest. I mean, I know you told us that you told us that people you bump into say to you, where do the 2Bs get their subjects from? Well, it is just often very spontaneous. I mean, the irony of today, and I've got my cookbooks in front of me. The irony of today was that Barton wanted to do irony number one, my cock up yesterday And irony number two, he's not here because he is an absolutely brilliant cook.
Ah.
I mean, he really is. He's somebody who, if he put his mind to it, he could actually be a proper chef.
Wow. I knew that he enjoyed it and did some for the family, but I'm getting to know him as indeed I'm getting to know you, and that I shall tuck at the back of my mind.
Well, I'll give you an example. Not only does he cater for his entire family, so that's at least Becky, his wife, and any one or all of the girls, should they be home. And they look forward hugely to his food, hugely. I mean, he's cooked stuff at home when we were both working, and would invariably, or we knew we were seeing each other because we knew from an app we had where we were going to be in court. So we knew we would be at the same venue. And he would bring me tidbits of what he'd cooked for me and my wife. And, they were just delicious. When he goes on holiday, to Dunbar, I think it's Dumfriesshire. Anyway, it's a beautiful coastal town. And he sends me these glorious pictures of the beach, or the beaches, and the sunrise and the sunsets, because he's out with Jed all the time. When he's healthy, the first thing he does is he goes down to the fish market. There's a fish stall, and buys what you and I might call fruits de mer, and he makes a bouillabaisse, which must be absolutely delicious because his family thrive on it. It's what they look forward to. So if he knows, for example, that one or more of his girls, as they often do, are going to join him in Dunbar, he will make this huge bouillabaisse, which they love. And, these dishes are not easy to do.
Oh, no. I find even cooking an egg difficult, to be quite honest with you. I am not very good at that sort of thing at all.
Well, I'm not quite that bad, but I'm losing it. And yesterday was an example.
Oh dear.
I've never been good on, with the possible exception of a chicken. You can't do much wrong with a chicken. Even I can't do much wrong with a chicken. But I've never been good at judging roast joints. So if you give me a joint of beef,
do you know what you're both best in?
Ada's got a piece of advice for us here. She's been listening to what we're talking about.
Air fryer.
Yes, we've got an air fryer.
Okay.
So what do you cook in your air fryer?
It's like a chip pan, but not a chip pan. You've got no fat in it.
Ah,
but
right.
They're cheaper than using an oven.
Are they?
Yeah, you can get little ones.
I could get one on eBay.
About £20 at the moment in Robert Dyer's.
Oh, right. Okay.
But that's just for a small one, but that's all you need, I suppose.
Yeah. Now, thank you, Philip, because of your topic of conversation, I've now got some advice on how to get something called an air fryer, which apparently will help my cooking.
We have an air fryer. It is exactly as useful as Ada has just said. It is cheaper than a regular oven because what it does is, as it says on the tin, it heats the air up to the temperature. So you are effectively frying, but by air, without fat, the food you put in there.
Wow. I think I've got to get one of those. Yes.
Well, I think you should, but just be careful. Do you do Amazon?
No, I tend to do eBay.
Right. Well, I don't personally do that, but yeah, just do a bit of research about them.
Yeah, don't just buy one online. Make sure you check because there's
Right.
a lot of.
I've got to test that Ada says.
characters.
Yeah. Right. I listen to my advisors.
Well, what I'll do is when we finished, I'll send you details of the one we use, which is incredibly useful. But there are some things you can't cook in air fryers. But you can cook a lot of things.
Uh-huh.
They are particularly good for things like chips, wonderful for chips. Whether you make your own chips or do it from the freezer, brilliant. Baked potatoes, roast potatoes, sausages. Excellent. And my wife, who is an absolute master at making fruit crumbles from scratch.
We're getting murmurs of approval here from Ada.
I love a crumble.
Well, Jackie, I tell you, it's just so full of admiration. She produces these fruit crumbles from scratch, you know, using breadcrumbs and all the oats and everything else. And they are just fabulous. They're also brilliant for heating up croissant, if you like croissant.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
They're very good for that. But you've got to be careful about vegetables. I've had some bad experience with eggs. But like I say, if you buy one, you'll get a handbook and it will tell you what you can and cannot cook. And unlike an oven, it's just dead easy to clean. As Ada says, it's like a chip pan, but the only fat you get in it afterwards is from what you've put in it. You haven't added fat.
All right.
But no, I'll send you details of. I'll scan you the handbook, and you can have a look at it.
Yes, thank you. Before we go, Richard is joining us. Yes, here we go.
Good.
There he is.
Aha.
We are at 8:30, are we?
No,
we're at 8 o'clock, but we've had a fascinating half hour in which I've been given cooking lessons.
Right. In which case, my error. I apologise.
No,
Richard.
Richard, Ernest, there's no need to apologise. We're just relieved to see you because we worried.
Yes.
We were worried that something had happened.
Philip, you don't need to talk about that, and it's not happened, so don't worry.
Okay. Philip, you just mentioned something which in some future date, you and Richard are going to cover the First World War.
Well, I couldn't include Richard in it. That's up to him. But it's just an interest of mine.
Yes. Well, can I leave you with a little snippet just in case you don't know? Did you know that prisoners of war were held in Colditz Castle in the First World War?
I did know that, yes.
Right.
And I think I knew that actually from Richard Barton.
Aha.
Yeah.
Well, there you are. We three of us, and that's about the sole knowledge that I've really got of any depth.
Well, Keith, which of the generals did you interview during the First World War? I think we need to know that.
I didn't actually interview him, but I sat and had a coffee with him at The Hague.
Yes. Did your country need you at the time, do you think? Do you think that's why it was?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No. Keith, The Hague you met was a bottle of scotch.
Oh.
Nice one. Touche, Phil. Touche.
Yeah. I must say that the angle was from the floor.
Yeah,
I'm sorry
lions led by donkeys.
I'm sorry that I come to the party late.
No, it's all right. I
haven't even brought any finger food with me.
Oh dear. I
Well,
was
eat your fingers then.
to Philip that we actually got off our personal chat and onto whatever it was that you guys wanted to talk about. So here we are, and it's just about past, isn't it?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Philip and I decided that we would like to talk about food, and in particular, the food that we cook ourselves. Philip is a competent cook. I think he probably cooks significantly for his family, and I've always been the cook in my household. And I thought we'd talk about dishes we like making. And I had an odd thought, oddly enough, probably about 8 o'clock when you started your broadcast without me, you bastards. Which was this. I thought about my mother, Patricia Rush, married to John Barton. And she was a very, very basic cook. She made what anybody would consider to be, and I use the term with pride, she made peasant food. And the reason I think about her is that I realize my choices of dishes that I want to talk about that I make are themselves peasant dishes, thanks to her. You know, I'm not a fancy Dan when it comes to cooking. Phil, that probably might resonate with you. I don't know.
Well, what resonates with me, and your ears must have been burning at 8 o'clock because I was singing your culinary praises. Because again, you'll be very self-deprecatory, but you are more than just a peasant food cooker. You are a wonderful cook, and you have, as I've been telling Keith and the man and his dog, you have often, when we used to work together, you would bring me a tidbit of something or other, and it was the pies you make.
I'd always make a bit for the tit and bring it to you. There's no question, Phil.
Yes, I thought you might say something like that.
Well, what's your go-to dish, Phil? If you may have already said it, I don't know.
No, I haven't, Richard. We've spent our time with Ada's help teaching Keith how to cook.
Oh gosh, you know, I think you're banging on a very locked door there. I would imagine. I would imagine all of Keith's cooking involves the following. Ping.
Well, he's confessed that he can't really boil an egg.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Could I say that I do love food, and when I was about 13, I had a school friend whose parents were very much old 30s style people. They lived in a great big rambling house. They always had 10 or 12 people at their table, and their names was Lamb. And Mrs. Lamb would go around the table and say, would you like, this is at tea time, would you like baked beans on toast, or would you like a poached egg on toast? And when she got to me, I always said, I would like poached egg on baked beans, please. I was that awkward at that age.
And a slice of lamb as well, presumably. Yeah.
He actually missed the lamb, because I always never ever refer to them as anything other than Mr. and Mrs. He did a very, very fine jugged hare.
Right. That's Larry, the dad, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Larry the lamb, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I thought I would just say that entirely Philistine.
It's very interesting, and hare is a controversial meat, as you know, because it's nowadays it's considered to be slightly endangered. But Pete used to have at the Western Road butchers a young lad there who was a real country boy, who, if you had a word with him, when he went out, he'd bring you back a hare. And hare is gorgeous, isn't it, Keith? I have to say.
Oh, absolutely. And jugged, of course, cooked in its own blood is just absolutely.
I know it's a little bit difficult for some people to cope with, because, of course, you know, there are people who are vegetarian and vegan, and that's their choice. Might I just say, Phil, that if you've been talking up my culinary skills, then
Well, I have.
I'm grateful to you for doing that. And our restaurant is going to open soon, Phil, as you know, and you'll be front of house.
With all my charm and good looks and good
you just have the ability to deal with that. And I'll be backstage opening tins.
Well, I've just been regaling Keith and the viewer with how at this time of year, for, in a way, identifiable reasons, but some not, how it affects my mood and how downbeat I am, unfortunately. So I wouldn't be any good at front of house just now.
Phil, when you say this time of year, I'm just thinking, what's the high point of your mood then? I might miss that. Is it sort of the midsummer? You know, do you go down to Stonehenge and have 2 minutes of happiness? I don't know. No,
it tends to be sort of end of May when Manchester City lift at least one trophy.
Oh dear! Of course you'd say that. Of course you'd say. No. So, Keith, there was a time a few years ago when one of my daughters decided that she'd become vegetarian, and they're all coming home for Christmas, and I had to cook them something that was suitable for Christmas. So I did all the pigs in blankets. I love stuffing with chestnuts in it, because the chestnuts soak up the oil in the liquid. But I had to make a nut roast, and it was disgusting.
They are disgusting.
Yeah, and my daughters sort of moaned at me Christmas evening, saying pigs in blankets great, stuffing great, all the veg great. What the hell was that? And I did say, teach you to be a vegetarian. And in fact, she then ceased to be a vegetarian. So it worked.
What figure in history also said, "What the hell was that?"
So is it a big noise or something?
The mayor of Hiroshima.
Right. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that. I was saying goodbye to Ada.
Yeah.
The mayor of Hiroshima.
Ah.
Yeah. Well, at least he had the chance to say it.
Yes.
So, Philip, sorry, tell us your signature dish that you would go to as your...
Just before you do that, because mine are only little vignettes, can I just say that when I was at university, I shared a house with 3 other guys, and one particularly was a very good cook, and we had a copy of the Boston School of Cooking, 1890.
Oh, God.
And it was a wonderful book, because it would say things like, take a pig, cut off its head, put an apple in its mouth, put it in the middle of the table, and throw the rest of the pig away.
Yeah. When my father first dated my mother, he came down from Scotland, and my mother's father, who had been a long-term widower, invited him round for dinner. So there's the whole family there. There's about 8 bloody siblings and my poor old dad. And my dad was sitting there in his smart suit and that. And my grandfather took out of the oven this pig's head. And he cut off an ear and said, "There you go, John," to my father. "That's the best bit." And my father somehow, he must have been a part of the magic circle, I don't know. He managed to get his handkerchief out of his pocket, pick up the ear and put it in his suit pocket so it looked as if he'd eaten it, because he said it was. But for example, I know that if you go to the big market at Leeds, and the big market at Leeds is, oddly enough, where Marks and Spencer's first started years and years and years and years ago, you can pick up a pig's head there for about £2.50. If you want a pig's head, I suppose.
I have to tell you this story, which is
Go
another
ahead.
round the table story.
Yeah.
We have friends in Arundel, a married couple.
Your wife has friends in Arundel. They tolerate you. Let's be clear about that.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for that clarification, Ernest. And Mary, the wife, obviously, comes from Cumbria and comes from a big farming family. She had 9 brothers. So you can imagine how formidable she is. She's a medic, and she's a medic who has always managed to appear somehow at the hospital where I've been having various procedures. So, for example, when I once went for an endoscopy, which is when they put a camera in a tube down your throat and into your tummy, she turned up out of the blue at the hospital and said very loudly, "Philip, we've run out of thin tubes. We're going to have to use the elephant version," which was a very cruel thing to say. Anyway, about them. So when she first met Mark, who is this very pleasant but really very timid and very polite chap from Croydon, she took him up to their place, the parental home up in Cumbria, for Christmas. And Mark, being Mark, was very polite about the food, didn't even finish what was on his plate, leaving some for Mr. Manners. And when he was asked by his future mother-in-law whether he'd like seconds, he said, no, I've done very well, thank you. And instead of accepting that, Mary's mother said, "What's wrong with my bloody food then?"
No, you know, that was very much my mother's stance. You know, it was food is love. As far as my mother was concerned, you go to the house, you just get showered with the bloody stuff.
Yeah.
And forced, and also with my father as well. You know, there would be more and more and more. But food is love is, in fact, quite an important little phrase, I think. There is something in that. I recognize it in myself when my daughters come home.
Yeah.
I'm cooking for them, even if they don't need it.
Yeah, but they love your food.
Before we leave pig's heads,
Yes.
could I say that the most recent one, within the last 6 or 7 years, I was working in Lugansk. If you recognize the name, it's where the rocket was fired in Ukraine,
Yes.
that brought down the Malaysian airliner. And there they have an open market, and they quite freely sell pig's heads. And when you go around, all the various vendors give you pieces of meat. They cut it off the steak or whatever to let you taste before you buy it. And it's a wonderful old-fashioned market. and I couldn't stop going there on a Saturday morning because it just it brought back memories to me.
No, I can understand. All right, Keith, here's a question for you. Which well-known work of 20th century literature involves a dead pig's head?
Don't think that I could answer that one.
Phil?
No idea.
It is Lord of the Flies, William Golding. And they have that as their sort of totem stuck on a stick.
Right.
The lads. It's a, as I'm sure you may know if you've read it, it's a terrifying story in some ways. It's
Yeah, I find it hard to watch it a second time because it frightened the hell out of me the first time.
No, the black and white film was a very good adaptation of the book, and he wrote it. Golding, he was a teacher. I think he was from Wiltshire, but he wrote it because he read a book from the late 19th century, which was a sort of some glorified story of three young lads who were stuck on a desert island and mucked in together and got on, and everything worked out okay. And he, being a teacher, just thought, that's not what kids do. If you left kids together on an island, there'd be bloody anarchy. And he wrote about that quite rightly. Great author, and there are lots of other stories by him that are worth reading. He's probably gone slightly out of fashion now, which is a shame. And you know what? If you look him up, he was a man with a massive white beard. So there we go.
Well, you're obviously modelling yourself on him.
If I could ever write anything like Golding wrote, then I would probably die a happy man. I'll be honest with you.
No, much better, Richard. That you actually write like Richard Barton. While I understand that that we all have people that we fashion ourselves after in our writing or any other artistic endeavor, it's always better to be ourselves.
I agree with you entirely, Keith. I said it's not a difficulty. Is that I'm just conscious, and I've said this to you before. You are a wordsmith when it comes to the written word. There's no question about that. I could knock together the spoken word.
Yeah.
But I do find that my written work, is in fact and Phil, you might want to comment on. Sorry, we might not actually get around to our topic. We might have to do it on Friday if that's all right, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, there is no formal approach to television on Mirador.
Yeah.
I'm
sorry.
Shall we agree 8 o'clock for Friday?
Yes, please. And as I say, complete. Dear reader, dear dog, dear single viewer, I offer you my apologies for running late. But Phil,
that wasn't meant to be a hint that you needed to apologise, Mr. Bean.
No. But Phil, you just coming back to the micro point that I'm making, fumbling away at.
Do you have, why do you have to call me a micro point? That's not very fair.
Well, Phil, because we all know I've read the graffiti in the ladies' lavatories at Lewis Crown Court. But Phil, I think there is something in when you train in law and then practice law, that in fact writing sensible, interesting fiction, there are people who have done it, obviously. Mortimer's an obvious one, John Mortimer. But I think it rather cuts it out of you. You know, I find that if I write something, there's Keith, you may be aware of this, but certainly in the past there was a system where a case would get reported, and it was the whole case reported in the law reports. But there would be a very short summary at the front of it. And frankly, Philip, that's what we'd read, isn't it?
Yeah, the précis. Yes, absolutely. The head note. Yeah.
It was called the head. You're absolutely right. It was called the head note, and it was just a summary. And I do find that if I seek to write anything, I write in bloody head notes. I don't really have the capacity to extemporize or to go on flights of fancy, which on one level I'm not sad about. You know, I'm very clear about what I say generally. Sometimes too clear, if I may say. I upset people, but
you don't say.
Yeah, Phil. But Keith, I you know, there is that. Whereas you as a journo, and I know you had to do your research. You had to make sure that you were methodical, but you had a level of license there, often the BBC license, to be fair, to.
Under threat today, by the way.
Sorry?
Under threat today.
Yeah, of course.
License, yes.
Yeah, very much so. You know, that's a whole separate topic, because how on earth can they even be contemplating that? You know, there aren't many things that in this country we can be proud of. One of them is the NHS. One of them is the bloody BBC. Leave them alone, for heaven's sake.
Yes. Well, you see, I would enter into debate with you there, because I worked for the BBC.
Yep.
And while the organisation is John Reith, Lord Reith, as he became, should be proud of what he established, it has got into such a formulaic mess and it will not, like politicians, accept the word reform, and it needs badly reforming.
I can see that, and I've got no difficulties about it being, you know, a proper reformation. I do, however, worry deeply about the idea that we will end up without a properly public funded TV channels and radio channels. I think it's one of the little jewels in our crown. I know that Phil listens to Radio 3 a lot. He doesn't understand any of it, but that's okay. That's fine. He sits there.
Well, you're talking to somebody now who, let me grin at you, believes that the future lies in the sort of thing that we're doing right now.
No, and Keith, I think there's room for all of that. For what we do, where I turn up when I wish to turn up and sort of stroll in and have a chat with you and go away again. But you know, I would be deeply upset if the BBC were not in its current, I think, relatively sensible system. And I know that entails all of us having to pay. I'm happy to pay that.
Can I? I'm going to be very controversial with you right now.
Go ahead.
Actually, to be quite honest with you, yes, I know that you think you stroll up and turn up, but actually, I'm quite firm in the how this television station functions. So it isn't quite as lackadaisical as it looks. But the sort of thing that upsets me is if you look at some of the programs from the past, we've had at least 3 ladies who appeared on Mirador television that could easily outdistance most of the people that appear as presenters on the BBC. And they never, ever got a look in. They would never, ever be considered, not least of which is that the board system, which is supposed to be fair, is as corrupt as anything I've ever come across. People who get the jobs at the BBC have already been pinpointed, even though they go through this farce of a board. Now, that sort of thing has got to stop, because there are lots of really very talented people in this country who need to be given a chance. And that's the sort of thing that I try to do here. And to be quite honest with you, in your own particular way, I'd love to put you 2 up. Have your own program, because you're fascinating, absolutely fascinating. But the BBC aren't going to come knocking.
Philip, do you think I've provoked him a little bit there? I don't know.
It's a bit like poking a bear.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Philip.
It really has fired up his blood, hasn't it?
Well, you know, Keith is giggling away, so that's lovely. But it is also lovely that he has such passion for a subject that's close to his heart.
Yes, I mean, one of the reasons I avoid, which Jackie, my wife, doesn't, are the breakfast television programs.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Where the quality of presentation is absolutely dire. And when people are paid an enormous amount of money to basically read an auto cue card, you know, at least do it properly.
That's what you're doing at the moment, though, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
No, there's no such thing as an auto cue in Mirador. Actually, there is. I've got one, but I never use it. It's known. There is a term that is now used, because more and more and more around the world with streaming TV is scripts are out of the window. It is free flow, and I think it's much preferable, and particularly where the sort of thing that we do is we never know where the hell it's going to take us.
No.
And that to me is far more exciting than setting off saying I'm going to talk about a pound of butter this morning and then boring everybody with half an hour about a pound of butter.
I have to tell you this, Keith, that when Philip was a very successful barrister, it was a Tuesday, I think. He would turn up.
You are a complete bastard.
Yeah, thank you. He would turn up at court in Lewes to do a lengthy and very compelling closing speech to a jury, and it was almost invariably written on the back of something that he picked up in the back bar of the Brewer's Arms, one of those little
yes.
And so his notes were limited to what you could actually write on that little square. But as I say,
stand in absolute admiration.
No. And I saw him do it many times. And I saw him doing it without any notes. And it was, a fantastic high wire act that Phil would do, because people would be in court thinking, he hasn't got any notes. how come he's doing this without any notes, with just a beer mat, if anything? But utterly compelling, if I may say. Philip, for all his many flaws, which I think we might do 4 or 5 episodes on later, maybe in the new year.
So how many floors does my building have?
No, exactly. Yeah. Phil, if it was your building, it would be a bloody block of flats, I tell you.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
But no, but you could see people in court thinking, how's he doing that? How on, and in particular, you know, other barristers, because you all look at each other and, dare I say it, judge each other. And Philip just had this ability, which was mesmerizing at times, to talk to ordinary people, 12 jurors, in a way that they would follow, and effectively without notes.
Well, thank you, Richard. I'm
It was often rubbish.
genuinely touched by. I was very lucky. I don't know where I got the skill from, but in my pomp, yes, that's what it was like.
Yeah.
You at the bar, Phil. You were, yeah. You held your audience, and that's a fantastic skill to have.
Yes.
And you undoubtedly had it.
Like
Keith.
you, Philip, is I actually have no idea where I got my abilities from. I used to avoid training like the plague, even though I have to say that one thing that I am quite good at, in fact, I'm very good at, is I'm very good as a trainer. But I expected people to put up with me when I wouldn't put up with other people.
Well, that's your independence of spirit, isn't it?
I suppose.
Which again is really why we're here, I suspect.
Yes.
I mean, returning to the newscaster point, something that still annoys me, you may remember there was a female on BBC Breakfast called Sally Nugent, who is this sort of glam puss brunette, made up to the nines, you know, dressed to kill, all the image, and she knows it. And she made a comment, you may remember, because it went into the media, and veterans, the Royal British Legion and people were very, very cross with her because she was reading an auto cue clearly. And she said something like, this is the anniversary of the infamous Dambusters raid.
Oh, heaven's sake.
And when I read about it, I was disgusted on a number of levels. A, to call those acts of immense bravery infamous, when they definitely shortened the war by breaching those 2 dams.
Yep.
But also that surely if she had half a brain, she could have corrected that word in her own way. Why did she have to slavishly follow the auto cue with a totally inappropriate word?
Well, probably, Phil, and I don't know the woman from Eve, as it were. She probably has no real knowledge of the Dambusters raid in the way that you and Keith, who of course was one of the navigators and one of the Lancasters.
Absolutely. I knew Gibson well.
Yeah. And I, no. She probably just had no idea what she was talking. And
yeah, I think you're right, Richard. I think that has to be the answer.
And that, in no sense whatsoever, I put it on the record, is that a sexist comment. It's a dare I say it, a truth about many female and male TV presenters, that they are vacuous, sort of talking heads.
You're absolutely right, Richard, and I suppose one of the things that I really would like to think when you're defending the BBC, there are many things to defend about it. So don't misunderstand. It's not a blanket condemnation of the BBC, but there are many things which I would love to improve. But do you know what the BBC has a record of? I worked for a guy called Phil Sidey. He's the reason I went to Northern Ireland. Phil Sidey did Pebble Mill at 1, which was a brilliant idea, and they fired him for it. I went to Northern Ireland, and I worked for a controller called Dick Francis, Sir Richard Francis, who ended up as the British chairman of the British Council. And they fired him from BBC because he had independence of thought. And to be quite honest with you, I created Gloria Hunniford's program, for which I am commended to this very day by people that worked with me, and the powers that be didn't like it, and to all intents and purposes, they fired me for it. Is that sort of thing cannot go on, and we can expect to see a development of a national broadcaster in the way that it should develop.
Can I just say, Phil, that having heard Keith's 2 most recent interventions, I would advise Louisians to avoid using the pavement along Western Road today, because he ain't gonna stop in that motor vehicle of his. He's an angry man.
It's going to be in top sports mode, isn't it, Richard?
It will be completely that, and I think we can both confirm, Philip, that we would recuse ourselves from being able to represent him.
Oh, unthinkable.
Yeah.
I can't think of anybody else who represent me.
The big worry in the future is that if he continues to have these sort of meltdowns, is whether he takes it to a garage and has it turbocharged.
Well, there is always that risk. Yeah. Has something added to the engine, so he's away down School Hill at 70 miles an hour.
I mean, on a serious level, it's called the British Broadcasting Corporation, and that last word is indicative. I mean, it has always struck me as a rather monolithic corporate institution, which does stifle individualism. It's always given me that impression, unless you're ridiculously left wing.
Yes,
that's my take.
There's a lot of truth in what you say.
Yeah, you see, I have the advantage over you there, Philip, in that I am ludicrously left wing.
Well, you claim to be. You're actually just a gentle socialist. You're not some commie, are you?
You wait, comrade. You will find out.
No, actually, you're not, Richard, because you believe in rule of law, and that's the key thing.
Do you know what? There's a whole program on the rule of law that we could do. It's a very woolly concept, and people. It's a sort of it's one of these terms that's taken out and used without people really knowing what they mean by it.
Yeah, but I always see it as in any given country, is that it is the concept by which they start to build any sort of civilized society.
There's an aspect to it, but it is, I regret to say, a rather tired old trope.
Well, I am old.
Yeah, well, that's fair. Yeah, you a trope as well? I can't remember.
Was it Richard?
Yeah.
Was it Hart or Devlin or both who wrote books on this subject?
Well, Devlin wrote, Lord Devlin,
Yes.
who was a member of what was then called the House of Lords, would now be called the Supreme Court,
Yes.
wrote a book about it. But it was Herbert Hart,
Yeah.
the greatest legal theorist, in my view, of the 20th century, who
And
wrote
the book was called
The Concept of Law.
That's it, The Concept of Law. Yeah.
And it was based upon a series of lectures he gave when he became the professor of jurisprudence at Oxford. And he was always associated with University College. And once I'd finished learning there, not at University College, but I had a summer job teaching American students. It was awful, but it was money. And I taught with a Canadian who's now, I think he's a professor at LSE, who was at University College. And we had to get a present for the best student that we taught, because it was a law course we taught. There were various courses, but it was law that we taught. And dear old James said, I know what, we'll buy a copy of The Concept of Law. Quite a thin little volume, actually.
Yeah, but a good choice.
Yeah. And we get Herbert to sign it.
Sign it.
Yeah. We went to his rooms at University College, Oxford, and I had two copies. I had the copy that the student was going to get, and I had my original copy, which had loads of notes in it. And he signed both of them, and it was just, for me, sad little old man who was very interested in jurisprudence, legal theory, in other words. It was a great moment, I have to say. He was such a modest man. And I said, so what caused you to write the book? He said, well, I did these lectures, 10 lectures. And then somebody said I ought to, I had them written out, so I ought to publish them. And I did. Completely without any arrogance to him at all, which he of all legal theorists merited. There are others.
Well, that's a lovely story. I really appreciate that, actually.
No.
My only ever claim to fame was when I was the president of the Law Society at the University of Durham. In the year I was that, I had to take out for dinner one of the guest speakers, and this chap was Brian Hogan.
Oh, right,
As in Smith and Hogan on criminal law.
The textbook on criminal law.
Textbook, yeah. What do they call them? There's a word when it's the book. It's something else. Seminal.
It can be
Seminal
that
book. Anyway, it doesn't matter. My God. I think we've discussed that bit in the film The King's Speech where Churchill is at lunch guzzling every possible form of alcohol.
Yeah.
In front of the king, who says, where have you learned, Winston, Mr. Churchill, to drink so much? And he says, practice, Your Majesty, practice. Well, Brian Hogan, and he was an absolute anarchist. Richard, you would have loved it. I as a, red-faced little student, was in awe of this man.
Yeah.
Not just his views, but his ability to drink. No, that was quite an evening.
Yeah, because with that book, which anybody who's who studies criminal law academically has to read. Smith was the steady one.
Yeah.
And Hogan was the as you say, the slightly edgy individual. And it works as a team. It's a bit like, let me have a think about it. It's a bit like, oh, you and me, Phil. I'm the obvious sensible one, and you're Animal from the Muppets. You know, it's completely clear.
Gentlemen, we've been going for an hour and a quarter, or at least Phil and I have.
Yes.
And we've extended a bit, Richard, so that you didn't lose out this morning.
You're very kind.
So we'll bring this to a close. But as you know, anytime that you appear, you can raise any of these points. We don't stand on formality. But I wonder if I could just return to the BBC to end this morning's session, because Lord Reith, John Reith, who was
Yes.
the first Director General, was a remarkable man and really did pull it up by its bootstraps. But there was one occasion when he was pacing the corridors of Broadcast House and heard from behind the closed doors, and this was in the days of just radio, the unmistakable sounds of sexual activity. And he opened up the door and saw the leading lady and the producer on the table doing unspeakable things. So he went back and called the controller and said, I'm not having this, get rid of them, sack them. And the controller said, well, we can hardly do that because it'll create a scandal. It's in the Radio Times, etc., etc. So he thought for a moment and then said, all right, then, get rid of the damn table.
Keith, you know, two themes from you. Your manifest dislike of the BBC, which we've seen today on various occasions. But also, I don't think we've had a broadcast recently where you've not had to raise the ugly issue of sex.
Well, that's a bit rich coming from you, Richard.
Well, I keep it very much in my pocket, as it were.
Well, you need to, yes.
Yeah, it's quite a big pocket, mind you.
Well, I know, yeah. Well, you go to fancy dress parties at the petrol pump, don't you?
I'm not saying you're wrong. You know, I've got a thing that's 12 inches long, but I don't use it as a rule.
Time for Twiddle Pip, gentlemen.
Right. Okay. Right.
Thank you. Another interesting and fascinating and informative morning, and we look forward to seeing you on Friday.
Lovely. Sorry that I was
o'clock.
late.
Oh,
yeah. All right. Okay.
Okay. Twiddle Pip.
See you then. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Well, another fascinating morning with the two Bs. And we never know what we're going to be talking about, ever. So this morning is just simply stream of consciousness. Some of you will enjoy what you hear, some of you and see, some of you will not. But all in all, it all works out in the wash. I'll be back in about 10 minutes' time with a look at the news headlines before we go to Normandy and Harry Atherton. So, let's say Twiddle Pip for the moment. From Lewis in the Black Horse Pub.